Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lexicon Crypto. We are excited that you are here, and we have a great show in store for you today. We have some, perhaps even some news to break today, so we're excited about that. In my virtual studio today, we have Miller Whitehouse-Levine, where he is the policy director of the Defi Education Fund. It is a great organization doing great policy work. I just want to give you a little bit of Miller's background, and then I'm going to introduce him and have him kind of give us a story of how he himself stepped into crypto. But with a background in international politics and also a minor in Mandarin Chinese, Miller has spent several years on the Hill working through several different policy groups and actually helped to lead the Blockchain Association's policy operation. And so he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge, a voice that is very critically needed at this time in DC and into the blockchain and cryptocurrency space. So, Miller, without further ado, I want to welcome you to Lexicon Crypto.
Andrew, thank you so much for having me. My pleasure to be here.
So let's just kind of jump right in, if you're cool with that. I'd love to understand, perhaps from your background, how did you end up in crypto, and is this something that you sort of saw coming from before, or did you just sort of fall into it like so many have?
Yeah, originally I originally got personally interested in Bitcoin in 2013, 2014. At the time, I was living in China with a Chinese family, both of whom were communist or are Communist Party members, and It was a very politically enlightening time for me. And I think the expat community living in Beijing at the time was very into this novel thing I had never heard of called Bitcoin. And so that's how I first found out about it. And I think, living in China made me appreciate it in a new way, the importance of personal autonomy and liberty. And I think, the ability for tech to rebalance the equation between the power of the state versus the power of individuals in a way that most technologies have not been able to. So that was definitely my first entree into crypto. At the time, there really wasn't an industry, and I was planning on entering the Foreign Service, which is why I ended up going to the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. Sure. Studied international politics and Chinese. Retained my personal interest in crypto, but never had considered it a career opportunity until I graduated college, and crypto by then had blossomed into what at the time seemed like a much larger ecosystem, which today dwarfs what it was in 2017. So after college, joined a multi-client lobbying firm that had the Blockchain Association, which is a crypto trade group representing 105 U.S. companies in DC. Worked on policy there for 2 years, which was definitely an experience. And I feel like the Washington's interest in crypto really exploded as soon as I started there. No correlation, I hope. But yeah, I remember when I started at the Blockchain Association, if a member of Congress mentioned crypto in a hearing, we would all text each other excitedly. And today, there's, I feel like, more hearings than there aren't hearings that mention crypto.
Yep. That's cool though.
So did that for 2 years, and during COVID, I was living with my grandmother during DeFi summer and spent countless hours using DeFi protocols during DeFi summer, and found it to be the most fascinating subsector in the crypto world, and wanted to work on DeFi policy issues full time. Concurrent to my interest in DeFi, the Uniswap Dao voted to fund and create a 501c4 policy organization to do research and advocacy for DeFi, and that organization ended up being the Defi Education Fund. So the governance proposal of the Uniswap Dao passed in summer 2021. And I got started August 1st, 2021. So we've been working for just over a year. I've expanded the team and DeFi, crypto, the government's interest in crypto generally has certainly exploded, and DeFi, I think, is the next area of focus if it's not already.
Right.
We do policy research and education and advocacy to essentially make the world safe for DeFi. We've met with 240 plus congressional offices to do DeFi 101s, just to explain to people, what is this weird term called DeFi and what does it have to do with crypto? We write comment letters in response to rulemakings that either intentionally, unintentionally, or could affect DeFi. We also participate in litigation to the extent that that's appropriate, and there's definitely been no dearth of activity in the last few months, ever since August 8th, the sanctioning of Tornado Cash protocols. I feel like it's been absolutely nonstop. So there's plenty for us to talk about. We also make grants to other organizations. So I will plug our grants program. We fund people and organizations working on projects or needing funding for projects that advance our mission to make the policy world safe for DeFi. So we do as much as possible to move the needle for the benefit of DeFi with respect to how sovereigns are approaching the space.
No, that's awesome. It's a really great and thorough background. So we're appreciative of that. Interesting to consider the Uniswap Dao sort of being the genesis. Was this a proposal that you had made into the DAO, or was it something that was going on that you were able to kind of be the person that they chose to help to spearhead it?
Yeah, so it was actually the Harvard Law School Blockchain Club made the proposal to create this organization, and I was am a participant in Uniswap Dao, and so was following it at the time. But eventually they created the organization and posted a job posting for
so cool.
Somebody to start setting the organization up, and I applied, and here I am.
Yeah, very cool. Well, that's it's a cool thing to hear, the evolution, even the evolution of the regulatory attention in DC, and how rapidly. I mean, it's like a volcano essentially. It's like just little rumblings here and there, and then all of a sudden, it just seems to have really sparked a ton of interest and obviously several bills now and things like that. But before we jump into some of the work that the DeFi Education Fund has participated in specifically, I'd love to understand, and you sort of, I think, touched on it, but in more depth, could you give to us an idea of the role or the place that you think your organization has in the overall market? You said, to make regulation safe, I think you said, and to sort of be eyes and ears perhaps on the ground. But what kind of a voice, and where do you see DEF sort of fitting into the overall conversation that's evolving in Washington today?
Yeah, so there's certainly, the crypto lobby has exploded over the last few years, and there's a lot of companies that have set up policy operations. There are several trade associations. Coin Center, of course, is very active. And I see us as being able to and filling a gap with respect to DeFi specific education and advocacy. So I think that, to the extent, for example, that DAO legislation is relevant to our organization and, how DAOs are going to be treated by the government. I think that's for a good example of a specific policy issue that I think DEF has been able to address in a unique way. I think that one of the crypto lobby's greatest strengths is that, for the most part, people in crypto are not here just because it's a job to them. People here are, believe in the potential of the technology and the potential of it to make the world a better place. And that means that there's, I think, pretty strong and, in my opinion, really encouraging unity across different organizations in the space, regardless of whether DeFi issues affect them or not. So, for example, several of the centralized exchanges, are very supportive of protecting DeFi in policy making and regulatory developments, notwithstanding that the fact that DeFi is listed in Coinbase's S1 as a potential competitor. So I think that I'm always worried or cognizant of the fact that there could be a CeFi DeFi split in DC given competitive issues, but to date that has certainly not been the case, and it's encouraging, and I think has made us much more effective because there's definitely strength in numbers.
Yeah, well, I think the in general everyone is aligned because there's sort of a singular target goal, and there's also perhaps a singular obstacle to that goal, and they both are aligned. So I think both.
And people often forget that, like, I think in DC and certainly among the general public, the only thing that exists is crypto, and there's nothing beyond that.
Right.
It's all one thing in the vast majority of people's minds.
Exactly. So I think that's interesting. Now, you guys have obviously filed a amicus brief. We know in relation to the CFTC's case against a fellow DAO and the work that they were doing. I'd love to kind of, if you could give us a briefing on what the status of that is, how things are shaping up there, and how you think how DEF is sort of seeing the overall case and what's going on there.
Yeah, so overall, the case is the CFTC alleges that the Ooki Dao illegally was operating a futures commission merchant without registering with the CFTC. In the United States, futures markets have to be conducted on registrants of the CFTC, and the Ooki Dao had not registered its associated protocol with the CFTC. So the CFTC's allegation made those points and said that because of those facts, they were going to be suing Ooki Dao. The issue with this case is, in my opinion, nothing to do with that, but more to do with how the CFTC formed its theory of liability. Instead of saying, it's this small group of people that are, essentially using a DAO in name only to operate a unregistered futures commission merchant business, they said anyone who had held an Ooki Dao governance token and voted with it had joint liability for the operations of the protocol.
Right.
So, I think that there's a key differentiation there because the facts really aren't great. For example, the most number of wallets that voted on an Ooki Dao proposal was 12. So, I think, and we don't know if those are 12 individuals. It could be one individual, as we know, for civil issues. So I think that nobody would have been raising eyebrows about this case if CFTC had said, Ooki Dao is running an unregistered company, and these folks are liable because they were participating in marketing, because they were making money from this, because they were, actively promoting it. But everybody instead, because they base their theory of liability on merely owning and voting with a governance token, that has massive downstream implications for other DAOs in a way that I think is wrong to adjudicate via litigation.
Right.
How DAOs are going to be treated as a matter of law has major questions about fairness, liability if you are merely a governance token holder? Are you really, should you really be held liable for the activities of any other governance token holder or the protocol? Does voting make you liable, even, for example, if you vote a way that the government would support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All, very, very sticky questions that will certainly have, pretty profound implications for the viability of DAO coordination in the United States. And, I think it's unfortunate that the CFTC intends to make policy via litigation. Those concerns are aggravated by the fact that, while the CFTC sued this alleged entity called the Ooki Dao, they didn't plead facts proving that the Ooki Dao is an organization that's servable, and at the same time do not intend to hold the Ooki Dao liable. They intend to hold the individual governance token holders liable. Right. Which brings us to our brief. So, the CFTC attempted to effectuate service by posting the complaint to a website that seems to be a governance discussion forum for the Ooki Dao, and via a help chat on a website that purportedly is related to the Ooki Dao. So the amicus brief that we filed essentially says, number one, the CFTC has not shown via the facts it pleaded that the Ooki Dao is a entity at all, and by extension an entity that can be served. And number two, if that is true, at the same time, intending to hold individuals liable, it's a fundamental question of due process for people to have notice that they're being sued so that they can have the opportunity to defend themselves in court. And what our amicus brief says is that merely posting a complaint to a website that, again, allegedly is related to the Ooki Dao is not a fulfillment of that requirement of due process. Right. And, I think one of the points we made is that the CFTC, if no one shows up to defend the case, the CFTC presumably will seek a default judgment that they would hope to enforce against the individuals that participated in Ooki Dao. And one of the points we made is that makes it all the more important that they go out and find those people a priori and give them fair notice that they're being sued so they can defend themselves in court and be heard as is every U.S. citizen's right. So we, LexPunk, and LexPunk made those arguments generally in two amicus briefs. Just after LexPunk filed last Monday, the judge, in order without argument, ruled that the CFTC's alternative service via the website and help chat was valid. But again, there was no argument in that judge's order ruling service valid. And so we followed up the next day with our brief, and we added a request to the judge that he consider reconsidering that order, validating CFTC's judgment. So last night, which brings us to last night, the judge granted that request. The judge said, I consider these amicus briefs to be requests for reconsideration of my order granting CFTC's motion for alternative service, and ordered the CFTC to respond to our briefs by, I believe, November 7th. So the judge is now going to hear out these arguments, which is certainly encouraging.
Great.
Because no defendants have shown up, and tomorrow was the deadline for defendants to show up. It could have gone to default judgment tomorrow had the judge not issued his ruling last night. So now it is incumbent on the CFTC to respond to the arguments that LexPunk, we, and potentially other filers make if others file briefs. And they will respond to that by November 7th. We have the opportunity to respond to the CFTC's response by November 14th. And then there will be a Zoom hearing of the arguments on November 30th. Over this motion to reconsider the judge's order granting CFTC's motion for alternative service. So that is very good news. It's a
Huge. Yeah, that's great
small
news.
win, but extremely encouraging, because it would have been a real shame if not only had this novel question of law that we think will have massive implications for the future of this ecosystem in the United States was
Yes.
adjudicated via litigation,
Yeah.
but more egregiously, in my opinion, via what potentially could have been a default judgment
Right.
against Ooki Dao, because no one was there to litigate it.
Right.
So still no defendant. We're just amici. We're not parties to the case, but
Sure.
the judge is willing to hear us out, which is very welcome and encouraging.
Yeah. No, that's. I think that's phenomenal, and certainly makes a case for the value of an organization like what you guys are doing, where you're monitoring and able to weigh in on things where perhaps members of DAOs or others feel like they don't have a vehicle in which to be able to do that. So I mean, I think that's incredible. It's a great, potentially even a historic act that you guys have taken. I think, and something I'd love to just sort of get your take on, feeling on, is it seems to me that the SEC more aggressively, but the CFTC maybe reluctantly but engaging, are not necessarily really trying to regulate, but they're more trying to influence the future laws that are being considered and written. Let me kind of explain if I can. It
Sure.
feels to me like there's so much ambiguity around the regulatory framework of crypto, and for so long, both lawmakers and regulators have ignored or considered this to be some sort of a fringe entity. Until numbers start getting into the trillions, do they start to go, oh, maybe we should do something? And it feels to me like the SEC is trying to regulate us back to the 1930s, proactively, trying to stuff a round peg into a square hole, and by using their, it's almost like they're cherry picking cases, and marking the areas that they deem as their area of regulation, trying to influence the formation of legislation. And the CFTC is almost feels like responding to the SEC's action by saying we kind of need to do something. Because on paper, why would they talk to Ooki Dao? Like, why Ooki? I mean, there's some really big DAOs out there. I mean, even like Maker DAO would have, you could potentially could have like made some sort of a case against any other DAO who's handing out governance tokens, and made essentially the same case that they are. So it's very interesting to me that they're sort of doing this. And is this unusual for these regulatory bodies to try to influence legislation in this way? And do you think that assessment of what's happening is accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a two-part question. I have a two-part answer. I think your assessment of the SEC is right on point. I think that regulators in many different areas have looked at crypto, and frankly, I think it's also reflected in media coverage of crypto as a tulip mania that they don't need to worry about, or didn't need to worry about, up until 2021, because it was all going to go away, and we have higher priorities, and why use our resources to figure out a regulatory framework that'll work for crypto. I think that has been a very costly and unfortunate approach, because of course crypto has not gone away, and now to your point, a year ago there's a $3 trillion market asset class that has no real regulatory consideration outside of law enforcement. So I think you're right. I think the entire securities versus commodities debate, to me, and the existential nature of that question is reflective of failure on behalf of the SEC. In my mind, the fact that that question is existential is due to the fact that we, under the SEC's approach to date, cannot have a functioning digital asset security market in this country. because
Right.
the SEC refuses to tweak its regulations to match how the technology operates, such that there can be a functioning market in digital asset securities in this country. And I think that's a very disappointing failure on behalf of the SEC, which has broad exemptive authorities and authorities to impose, potentially new obligations to address crypto-specific risks. But there's been, for whatever reason, an absolute unwillingness to do that. And it's been a lot of shoulder shrugging, and I think that's totally to the detriment of consumers. At the same time, things like Celsius and Voyager, which hurt hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of American consumers, slipped by under the radar in a asset class that the SEC has been claiming for 8 years to be in their jurisdiction.
Right.
There's something is missing here. There's something is going wrong, and I think that I think the SEC, to your point about trying to influence legislation now, has realized. I think many lawmakers and policymakers have realized that the SEC's approach, love crypto or hate crypto, has failed consumers in really profound and unacceptable ways that aren't sustainable. And so I think that I'll say pre-Ooki Dao case stood in contrast to the CFTC, which I think was proactively trying to figure out a way for crypto to come into the regulatory perimeter and such that the markets could function and consumers could be better protected than they are today. I think the Ooki Dao case, regulators, whenever there's a novel question, like to go after low-hanging fruit. So I think it's Ooki Dao reflects that. Ooki Dao reflects that kind of conservative approach to litigation because the facts are pretty bad for Ooki Dao. Again, it's not terribly decentralized compared to the other large DAOs you mentioned. And if I'm a CFTC enforcement official, I would rather test my novel legal theory of liability on a couple person DAO versus a couple tens of thousands of person DAO. In my opinion, the Ooki Dao case is probably the most dramatic example of regulation by enforcement the U.S. government has ever done, which is why I say that the CFTC's approach seemed relatively productive compared to CFTCs before that. But claiming that every governance token holder that is voted, forms an unincorporated association forever in perpetuity via litigation is quite a statement of policy that I think is more dramatic than really anything the SEC has done. So, I do think that to a certain extent there is a bit of politics at play. I think that to your point, a regulator. For crypto, it's if we're sitting on our side of the table, it's awesome that the CFTC was approaching things in a seemingly flexible and forward-looking manner. But there are other folks in Washington who think crypto is a net negative for society, and the fact that the CFTC seemed to be taking an innovative, flexible approach wouldn't be seen as a good thing to those people. So they are, balancing the various stakeholders that they answer to, and being perceived as perhaps being less strict or aggressive than the SEC might not have been a politically advantageous place for them to be in. Not to say that I think enforcement is primarily driven by politics, but I do think that it certainly does play some role.
Yeah, I mean, we all understand. Anyone who's been around policy for any period of time understands that politics plays a role in the making of policy in some of these actions. There's no question that it's just the nature of what it is. These are political appointed roles taking political action, but stepping across the line into the policy world doesn't negate them of the influences of that, which is just a reality.
Yeah, we're all humans, that's...
Yeah. Yeah.
Like our
Yeah.
entire constitutional system is designed to mitigate the fact that we're humans.
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
nothing novel there.
Right. Man, this is we're coming right up on half an hour, and you've been extremely generous with your time. This has been a very helpful and enlightening conversation, and just want to thank you for taking the time and for talking to us. Love to have you back on again, especially as this Ooki case continues to roll
Oh yeah.
forward. We'll definitely be staying attuned to that, and checking in with you, of course, as time goes on. But Miller, thank you again for the time. Thank you for your insight into all that you shared with us today, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Andrew, thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
What's the best way, Miller, for our folks to find out more information about the DeFi Education Fund or to connect with you personally?
Yep, the central repository of everything is on Twitter, of course, so at fund_DeFi. We have a link to our website and our Substack. We send out a weekly Substack with DeFi policy updates and our takes on them. So I encourage you to follow us on Twitter, and if you're into the more nitty-gritty details, subscribe to our Substack. But certainly, our DMs are open through at FundDeFi, and then feel free to DM me on Twitter too. We are available, and if you're in DeFi, have questions about the regulatory landscape, or just curious about what's happening and interested in what the scene is, we are here to work on behalf of DeFi developers and users, and would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miller. Thank you so much for joining us today on Lexicon Crypto. We look forward to this wonderful episode. We think that there's going to be some great news coming out of this. And stay with us. We've got a couple of other guests coming up shortly. Thank you so much.